Hey guys, my name is Jesse. Welcome back to my channel where all I talk about is domain format. If you don't know what domain format is, don't worry. I got a handy video on how to play up here you can watch. Today, I had something I was really excited to show you guys and talk about. It's always very exciting for the Discord whenever another YouTube channel mentions domain format, and that's exactly what happened. You guys are probably familiar with Cardmarket. They have a Yu-Gi-Oh channel. In one of their videos, they go over the subject of alternative formats in Yu-Gi-Oh. It's honestly a really cool video to watch, especially if you're, say, a Magic player who doesn't know much about Yu-Gi-Oh formats in general. It will be linked below, so you guys should watch it if you can. I personally am going to go over the parts of the video that talk about domain format or that I think are interesting in general. I'm not going to just play the whole entire video and react the whole time. I am going to react to as much as I can. It's always interesting for me to see people's takes on domain format who maybe haven't played or tried learning but didn't get around to playing. So we will be doing that really quick. If you guys want to support me, I have a TCG Player affiliate link down below. You can click on it before doing any shopping on TCG Player, before building a domain deck, let's say, and I'll get a kickback. It won't add anything to your cart total, doesn't charge you nothing, just lets them know that I sent you. I now have a channel member option. It's mainly going to be for putting up the games that I edit. I'm now going to be putting up the entire video up for channel members if you guys want to hear all the chit chat, banter, back and forth and all that whatnot. But honestly, I would just appreciate it if you guys could like the video. My mission is to share domain format with as many people as possible, and that helps in that regard. Also, if you guys want, after seeing this, you want to go watch Cardmarket's video and go comment on their channel specifically, let them know if you want to see them do any domain content, that would be also greatly appreciated. Okay, with that said, let us switch over. There we go. So let's play this from the beginning.
Today, we're on a quest to solve one of the hottest topics in the Yu-Gi-Oh community, alternative formats. Today I'm here with our resident competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player Johnny, and also from the Magic channel joining us is Yamin. How are you guys?
I play Magic.
That's great. You play a game that actually has other formats you can play. What is that like?
Wait, Yu-Gi-Oh just straight does not have other formats at all?
So we do have other formats, but in general, the only real officially supported, everyone 90% of players play is one format.
Wow, really?
Yes.
No. So if I pick up Yu-Gi-Oh, there's one way for me to play.
If you want to go to your local game store and play Yu-Gi-Oh with people, they're pretty much all going to be the same.
If my favorite card is not played in that format, I can't play with my favorite card.
Nope. And if you got into Yu-Gi-Oh through Master Duel, you won't be able to play the...
Yaman brings up a really good point there. If there's a card that I like and it's not playable in competitive advanced, can I just not play the card? And they're like, yep. Now, I'm not going to say too much for TCG Advanced. I do like to play Advanced. I like to go into regionals and locals. I plan on going to YCS Anaheim, so a little bit of a heads up there. But in general, I think most people would agree that there's sometimes tier 0, like with tier limits, right? And there's tier 1 decks. And then from there, you could probably say there's like tier 2 decks, tier 3 decks, which would be, I guess, Rogue. And there's just not viable decks, and the not viable deck section is probably 99% of Yu-Gi-Oh, something like that, right? Currently right now there's Fire King Snake Eye, there's Yubel Fiendsmith, Tenpai. Those are some of the top decks right now. Those would be all in the tier 1 that I mentioned, right? But what if you like Melfi's? You might be able to do something in the Rogue category, but most people would agree you're gonna have a hard time topping in a regional with that, right? Let alone top 8ing a YCS. Only there was a cool format where you could play basically whatever you want. But anyway.
And other than that, it's mostly just these time capsule sort of formats where people go back to a ban list and say, let's play with all the cards from 2010, and then they all play together like that.
Did no one ever inform you that you can play with the packs or something? Like you can crack packs, play with them?
Well, draft doesn't really work for us because ever since 2010, 12, 14, we started having way too many archetypal cards. So if you open a pack, you have like one card that only works with other cards that were printed 3 sets.
A couple interesting things that they said there is that a lot of our other formats are basically just different periods of advanced where players say, hey, you know what? I liked 2005 GOAT format. Let's play 2005 or 2010 Edison, I think. It's kind of weird because that's not, from a Magic perspective, it's very strange because one of the by far less popular formats would be something like block constructed. That's the closest comparison really, because ain't nobody gonna walk into a Magic store and be like, hey guys, I want to play 2005 standard. It's just, I don't think it happens. So coming from a Magic perspective, the whole thing about choosing a time frame to play standard is kind of weird. And then also, if you don't play Yu-Gi-Oh, it's hard to explain why draft doesn't particularly work very well, and that's mainly just because of archetypes.
So Unlike in Magic, where there's like Commander, and everyone plays Commander.
Yeah.
If you play Magic, you play Commander. In Yu-Gi-Oh, if you're like looking to play an alternative format, there's already like such a subdivide through the alternative formats that the communities are so much smaller between all of them that there's no like one agreed upon alternative way to play like Commander was. And Commander started as a community format, didn't it?
It did. The story is actually kind of crazy because it started as a community made-up format, right? Like people made up those rules that were not part of the game design team of Wizard.
Right.
And then it grew from there, and it grew and grew and grew to the point that Wizards couldn't ignore it. Like the Wizards first, of course, didn't plunge themselves into let's only make product for this format. They like dipped their toes in to see is there profit to be made. I mean,
Right. Yeah. So yeah, where was the line drawn between Wizards like putting out their first Commander product? Like, what did that look like?
I think the first ever Commander product, it was just pre-constructed decks, if I remember at the time, like the very first pre-constructed decks. But here's a wild pick for Yu-Gi-Oh! How about you just port Commander over? Just allow a single copy of every card. Like you can still have a ban list, like of the really bad stuff, and then just one copy of every card. How about that? Like just spice it up a little.
And there actually is a fan Yu-Gi-Oh! Commander format that people are working on right now. I think it's called Domain format. Do you know what I'm talking about, Johnny?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm covering it. Hold on.
And there actually is a fan Yu-Gi-Oh! Commander format that people are working on right now. I think it's called Domain format. Do you know what I'm talking about, Johnny?
Yeah, we get that a lot in the comments as well. People asking for Deckmaster and Domain.
Deckmaster and
but
Domain,
it's still very like fringe. Not many people play it. We also have a Pauper.
Hey, I resent that statement. So yeah, just out of the blue, I'm get told in the Discord about this video. They're saying like Domain got mentioned. You guys go check out this video. And I watched it and I was so surprised that they brought it up. I hoping that they would. Obviously, they touched on quite a few interesting subjects there. Yaman is surprised that there's hardly any alternative formats that a lot of people play. Taylor mentions that there is, but the player base is kind of small for each of them. There's a lot of infighting about, I've definitely noticed this. There's a lot of arguing and infighting about what the casual format should be. And then everybody just goes, I'll go make my own format with blackjack and hookers, say like I've definitely noticed a lot of those sentiments myself. But another thing that I've noticed is that, and this isn't to rag on anybody else or whatever format they like, but I've seen quite a few attempts at making formats or making them big or trying to grow them. The efforts I've seen put into those type of things kind of wane off, because just talking about this type of format, like Yaman says, like, why don't you just port Commander to Yu-Gi-Oh? I've personally seen quite a few attempts at that myself. It starts with a Reddit thread or something or a Discord. People just they just rag on it. It's weird. But then again, I would also argue that they kind of make some weird rules. For instance, somebody came in the Domain Discord, saw our rule set, didn't particularly like our rules, so they started going elsewhere to talk about their version that they would like to try out with some of their friends, which they have every right to do. I'm not saying they have to play Domain format. When you start making up your own rules, things can get crazy pretty quick. And I think that's a big problem with trying to make a format popular. When you say, I'm gonna do exactly what you're doing, or for the most part anyway, take it elsewhere and then ban Slifer. It's like, okay, go for it, dude. It's hard exactly to summarize what I'm talking about here that I've noticed, but I've seen a wide variety of formats be suggested, and I've seen even more wide variety of the rules to suggest for those formats. I think there's something in reducing the number of rules you have to change in order to play the format that you're trying to cultivate. For instance, Domain format, Michael, I personally think he's cultivated a rule set as short as possible in order to play 4-player Yu-Gi-Oh! Singleton with the domain restrictions. Now, you might not get that idea from watching my how to play video, that it's a very short amount of rules, but in all honesty, like a bunch of very nitpicky exception rules are detrimental in my opinion. For example, banning things I think have to be taken very seriously. One thing I like about Domain format and the way Michael runs it is he would need a lot of evidence to go out of his way to say, okay, we got to ban this card. So far, it just hasn't been an issue, surprisingly, but who knows how things will shake out, pan out. So that's personally why I think that alternative formats are kind of having trouble getting off the ground, but let's see what else they got to say.
Have you guys considered creating a format that's fun to play, so like a community can gather around it? Because there's, from what you're saying, it feels like, yeah, we have these like community made up formats like Pauper and Commander, but they're just not, like, there's no community for them. In Magic, when, I don't know, I make up a format with my play group at the LGS and people will play it if it's fun, if they find fun in like deck building.
So I got something to say about this really quick. Why not just make a format everybody likes? Yaman says. Well, that argument has been going on since the beginning of Yu-Gi-Oh! One of the major differences between Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh! Is in Magic, you have a resource system, and the resource system limits what you're capable of doing. And over time, that the number of actions you can take or the strength of the cards you're playing increases so that the game ramps up. That is quite literally the opposite with Yu-Gi-Oh. You start off with a lot of plays. You have all your resources right before you in the beginning of the game. You're using those resources to essentially, you're just trying to stop your opponent from playing Yu-Gi-Oh. That's what it comes down to. 1v1 Yu-Gi-Oh is just trying to stop your opponent from playing Yu-Gi-Oh. It's just how it is, you know? You're trying to stop them from summoning, you're trying to stop them from playing cards, you're trying to negate things, you're trying to destroy things. A lot of that happens within the first turn of each player's turns. And then from there, it tapers down. Both players have less resources. Whoever comes out on top, you know, usually that winner is decided by turn 2. It's quite difficult to say just make a format everybody likes, because while there might be people who don't like the way I explained how Yu-Gi-Oh works currently, there are people who do enjoy it. There are people who like playing advanced Yu-Gi-Oh, trying to play the best deck in a cutthroat format, because winning an event like that feels so good. This is where I think Domain can come in, because it can give an alternative to that. When trying to make something like a casual, or I guess alternative format, there's a lot of opinions on what to do with the rules. A lot of people have come into the Domain Discord saying we should just outright ban things like skill drain, floodgates in general. It's like, well, if you want to nitpick about floodgates, there would be a very long list of things that you would have to ban, and it's just, personally, I just don't think it's good. One cool way that I think more casual players can be happy with playing Domain format, even among players who like to play more modern Yu-Gi-Oh cards, is that being in a 4-player pod just so happens to be a pretty good self-regulation tool. If one guy's playing a pile of self-mill and Tearlaments and Lightsworn and, you know, Horus stuff and gets out of hand on turn 1 or on their first turn, the other 3 people can be like, you know what, we're gonna try and deal with this guy. This is gonna be an arch enemy game for turn rotation, and then we'll go from there. And quite often it's very effective at stopping the person from taking over the entire game. Because of that, I think that's a good tool for having the game go in the direction the 4 players would like, without having to come in with like very particular special rules or a swath of bans, stuff like that.
Is there a way to bring Yu-Gi-Oh back to combat-based Yu-Gi-Oh, or like turn-based Yu-Gi-Oh, where we each play 10 turns or like 20 turns with like a simple rule to restrict gameplay? Is there something to take it back to the basics, back to the anime with like a simple restriction?
Other than,
so he talks about going back to GOAT format, which does significantly reduce the number of plays and increases the number of turns each player takes. He also goes on to talk about Speed Duel, which simplifies the game somewhat by making a lot more combat or battle phase focused, because you don't get a second main, you just go straight to end after combat. One thing I want to say about this section in particular is that Domain format is not what he's trying to suggest here. The first person who goes in Domain can still do pretty similar things to Advanced by setting up a lot of stuff. I have an argument why I don't think that's the best way to play Domain, because you'll most likely get all your cards wiped out by your 3 opponents and then you're left with nothing. So it's, in my opinion, it's not the best to go all in on turn 1. So because of that, I think a lot of veteran Domain players know that, so they won't go all in on turn 1 on any of their turn 1s. Because of that, the game lasts quite a bit longer, because then it turns into a grindy game. Who can out resource their opponents, who can out grind their opponents, who can keep pressure going later in the game. So in that aspect, I think Domain would satisfy a lot of people who want to play a much longer game with more turns, while it's not normal summon, Lejin, set, trap, hole, pass. You know, I still think it scratches the itch of what he's talking about, which is a longer game.
I mean, what you said too about like the expression of deck building and stuff, I feel like in Yu-Gi-Oh, people get very attached to certain decks they're playing. And maybe that's just because in Yu-Gi-Oh, every deck tends to play so mechanically different from each other. Like, I'm sure obviously that's true in Magic as well. But in Yu-Gi-Oh, there's decks that quite literally are the only cards in the game that have that certain mechanic. So like, oh, I attack and then it goes back into my deck and I shuffle it in and I bring a different guy out, or like just really like weird interactions that only your deck does.
So yeah, Taylor makes a good point here. People get really attached to decks, their specific archetype that they like. This is somewhere that I think Domain shines, because every single archetype that I've personally been attached to, I've been able to make a Domain deck for. Some archetypes do better in Singleton than others, obviously. It's definitely still doable for most archetypes. And that's one of the challenges, right? It's like, how do we make a format that is hopefully more fun or different than Advanced, and fun in different ways than Advanced, without axing a large portion of archetypes or deck strategies? I'm not gonna lie, that's hard. That's difficult. I'm not even sure if there is one alternative format that every single player could gather around and enjoy, just like, for instance, just like Commander in Magic the Gathering. Personally, I think Domain's the best shot at that. I think it is the best shot at getting the most players excited about this format, building decks, playing with their friends at LGSs, just being, in general, being an alternative to something like a competitive Advanced format. Again, the reasons why I think that is because personally, I think their domain's rule sets includes the most archetypes possible of all the, say, alternative format rule sets. I'm not going to name any of them because I don't want to throw shade at anybody, but I'm sure you guys can know what I'm talking about. So not only does it, in my opinion, cut out the least amount of archetypes, I think it would be the best place to try your favorite archetype that's, say, not advanced competitive. I could probably do a whole YouTube video talking about the games where I've seen decks win that I did not think were ever possibly going to win. I've heard about Exodia wins. I got absolutely destroyed in one game by a Worms deck. Of all things, Worms. Yes. I've also seen top tier decks get taken down by other decks. I have a video of a tier player starting off with Painful Choice getting taken out in that game. I genuinely think that if people tried domain format, I think they would love it. Everybody I've convinced to play domain, I have a bunch of extra decks to let people borrow. They'll borrow a deck, they'll play, and they'll go, I really like Tistina. Can Tistina work in domain? Yes, it can. Tistina is actually a very budget-friendly, effective deck, by the way. So let's hear some more what they got to say.
Website that basically just says, oh yeah, go to your local game store and you can do a Heart of the Underdog tournament, and you as your store just decide what decks aren't allowed in the tournament, and then you run a tournament like that. It's like, could you imagine trying to have like a council of Yu-Gi-Oh players be like, oh yeah, Yaman, you can't play your deck because you're too good. Snake Eyes is banned and whatever.
All right, now that makes it.
This, really quick, is also a difficult thing to do. I've seen all kinds of formats. I've seen how each of them approaches their own ban list. First off, good on them. I genuinely think that if people don't like the advanced ban list, go try something else. Like, what's to stop you from being like, you know what, let's try Heart of the Underdog. Let's ban these cards. Let's try not to be too heavy-handed, though. Or maybe they do want to be heavy-handed. Whatever. Maybe someday there's going to be a magical underdog ban list, and that event will get famous because that underdog ban list basically solves everything, and everybody will gather around that specific underdog ban list. It'll get a name, and there'll be people who manage that specific underdog ban list. It will flourish and become popular. That would be cool. Genuinely, that would be cool. I would personally love to see that happen. I would support it. I would go try and play it, to be honest. But even with that said, I can't imagine how hard it is to balance a ban list. I mean, I'm sure you guys remember playing stupid made up games as kids in the elementary school where you guys make up rules for a game, and then somebody starts doing really well and you go, you know what? You can't do that anymore. Actually, sorry, that's now banned. That type of attitude about a ban list, it's really hard to justify wanting to be engaged with that. Just because somebody on the council or, the council for this made up underdog list, let's say, doesn't like Labyrinth and then just bans all Labyrinth cards, like, come on. That will be quite the slippery slope. While I don't want to see a heavy-handed ban list that bans anything close to being modern Yu-Gi-Oh! But that's just me. I don't even know if that's the popular position to take on it, honestly. So bans are difficult. Domain sets itself apart. Nothing is banned because of the self-balancing feature of 4 players. Because of that, so far it hasn't been a problem yet. Also taking into consideration that you only have a 25% chance of going first. I personally have not seen any type of board be built that could not be broken by 3 opponents. That's just if they're playing any amount of kaijus and removal board breakers. I just haven't seen it yet. I have a game where a Frog Sprite player builds a quite impressive board with like 3 negates plus other interaction. He does manage to control us for a few turn rotations, but it eventually does get broken. He ends up losing. If that can happen, why would we ban any of those cards, right? One skill drain isn't going to stop all 3 of your opponents from killing you with their normal summon monsters. So why should we ban skill drain? Mystic Mine, same thing. It's not going to stop all 3 of your opponents. While people scoff, oftentimes will scoff at the idea of no ban list. After you play and after you've played quite a few games, there's a lot of evidence for why so far it's not that big of a deal.
It sounds like the core issue might be related to the direct synergy between cards themselves. Like one card saying that the core archetypes being so tightly knit where you can't combine cards from different archetypes, or if you do, then we have archetype A and archetype B and we just slap them together into a deck, and they play their own thing.
Essentially.
Deck building expression is severely limited by, if I play this card, I also need to play these other 5 cards. No questions asked.
Basically.
It feels like, from what you're saying, if you eliminate that issue somehow and you actually get to play different cards in different ways that you haven't experienced before and just create these wacky decks or something, you get to have fun.
So yes, their archetypes are limited quite a bit with their interaction because a lot of the archetypes lock themselves or just in general don't work very well with other archetypes. That's one of the challenging and fun things about Domain, is trying to build a 60 card singleton deck with either as much support as possible for the main thing you're trying to do, or trying to find different archetypes that do work together, or being excited about pack filler because you can find a way to utilize it or make it effective in whatever Domain deck you're trying to play. You can also just play whatever pile you want in Domain by picking, one of the 6 attribute monsters monsters as a deck master, either Invoked Elysium or La Puila Mana, whatever it's called. You can just take the whole negative part, you know, the restriction of domain completely out of the equation and just play whatever you want. That's another strength of domain that I think people often overlook. You know, someone can sit there and say that, you know, I want to play Snake Eye, but I don't want to be locked into Fire Pyro. It's like, okay, well, pick a deck master that mentions more attributes, or pick one of them that mentions all the attributes, so you can just literally not care about domain and just build whatever 60 card pile you want. In my eyes, personally, I kind of feel like domain could facilitate quite almost any deck in Yu-Gi-Oh, but in domain.
We really should mention Speed Duel, which essentially they made Yu-Gi-Oh 2, and then they added like character abilities. So you would essentially play as characters in the anime.
That sounds hella cool.
And once per turn, once per game, really, you would have this like, oh, I use Pegasus's special ability, which lets me see a card in your hand, or like whatever it was, right?
Nice.
The problem was
I gotta say this really quick about skill cards. I love skill cards. Brief disclaimer, I have no control over the rules for domain format. I know I talk a lot about domain format. I make content on domain format. I'm very close with Michael, who runs the domain format Discord. I have no control over the rules or bans or anything like that whatsoever. I love playing with skill cards. I know it's not part of the official rules, but I would totally, anytime anybody wants to play a domain game and they say, hey, you guys want to try some skill cards? I would be down 100% of the time. I think they're really cool. I'm not advocating that they get like thrown into the official rules of domain. It doesn't have to be. Michael tells this to people all the time. You guys can play however you want. Technically, I can't stop you. Anybody watching this, whoever gets a chance to play with me, I'm 100% down with using skill cards.
I wish it was as easy as just play Commander. Just do Yu-Gi-Oh! Commander.
Just have a permanent mistake up and just play Highlander. That's the new rules.
Right. But even like I tried to look into domain and it was like the deck building rules. Like Commander, it's easy. You just go, oh, you're like color identity and those are the cards you play. In domain, they're like, okay, so if you're your main monster, you can use their type and their attribute, and also any cards they mention in their card text, you can use cards with those types of those cards. And I was just like, I can't even understand how I would begin to build a deck for this. But these were like knives in my heart. It just straight into my chest. I'm a little sad. I'm not upset that that was what he got from my video. I'm sad that my video still isn't clear enough to explain domains. I hear a lot about people saying like they do a once over on the rules, or they watch my video and they go, oh, domains are too advanced. Like, why is it so complicated? I wish if I was able to sit down with Taylor and talk with him, I think I'd be able to lay it out very clear, very easily. It's not as complicated as he's making it out to be. And I'm not saying that to like be negative towards Taylor. Like I said, I'm disappointed in myself for not making my how to play video as clear as possible. Maybe I can do a video going in depth about specifically what a domain is, specifically summoning your deck master, how you can and can't summon your deck master. So just to clarify, in case Taylor is watching this, after picking a deck master, the monsters that you're allowed to play in your deck and extra deck have to either share an attribute, a type, whatever archetype it is, or if it mentions any type, attribute, or archetype in its text, you can also play those things. If your deck master mentions a specific card, you can play that specific monster, but if that specific monster ends up having different types and attributes, you're not also allowed to play those things. You just always look at your deck master for what your domain is. See, it's like, I wish I knew what card he was talking about, because I would fully explain it right here and now. Again, I don't know how else to help out Taylor other than to say, Taylor, if you're watching, I would be glad to get in a Discord call with you and explain a domain. I can give you as many examples as you would like. maybe domain will take off. We'll see. Maybe we'll try
that. Maybe one video.
If you want to see a domain format video, let us know in the comments below.
As Taylor said, if you guys want to see Cardmarket do a video on domain, you guys could, stroll over there to that video. It'll be linked below. You can compliment them on their wonderful video and maybe suggest seeing a domain game or two. So yeah, it's always really cool to see people mention domain. I know they kind of joke about like maybe domain will take off, but I kind of think that's undercutting what domain has already accomplished, to be honest. For instance, when I joined the Discord, it had like 30 people in it, and now there's almost 2,200 people in it. I made my channel with no previous channel experience, and I just hit 1,500 subscribers. We've gotten quite a few popular Yu-Gi tubers to mention domain or get in contact with us. There's Golden Nova, Team APS. This is just the beginning. For anybody who's watching this and they're wondering if domain's going to take off, I have very high hopes that it will. I genuinely think it will. So anyway, that's for the video. I just talked about the pieces that I thought were specifically important to domain, but you should watch the whole video because they do go over a lot of things like draft, cube, time wizard, underdog, all kinds of stuff. Go give their video a watch. That's everything I got to say about this. So until I see you guys next time, have a good one.